Yes, over 4 years.
And that money has effectively come out of member reserves to fund that. Is that accurate?
Yes, whenever we enter a new market and grow business, it would put a drain on reserves.
Okay. And just to clarify, you said it's a joint venture. Who's the joint venture with?
It's with our new affiliation partner, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. Prior to the affiliation, we were partnering with them to enter the Medicare Advantage market.
Okay. And what is the current plan for this? Is it to continue this product line?
That is something that we are prepared to talk about in executive session. We have some plans in this line of business, but it's a highly competitive market, and moving into 2025 would be sensitive information.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for taking that out of turn.
Mike, I have a follow-up on that.
Oh, okay.
So, how much RBC is $43.4 million?
I can do the math for you.
I think you said 10 million is 33 RBC points.
So 100 and, sorry. 140 points. When we entered that market, we planned on investing about 100 percentage points of RBC. We knew that it was going to cost something, so it cost us more as a business. But you know, we've been very pleased with the acceptance of that market. We've got 15,000 members, and about 7,000 of those are group members, including Vermont teacher retirees, as well as 8,000 individuals that we're serving in that market.
So one of the messages throughout this hearing has been that, you know, and I didn't take it like offensively in any way whatsoever. It's a fair discussion, and it's an important discussion, but sort of some of the language around underfunding. But it seems like there's pretty big losses from the Medicare Advantage program. And I can't say, you know, it's underfunding and then see like huge losses in another line of business. Is it the underfunding, or is it the loss in the other lines of businesses? And there's many factors, right? Like there's overages, which are also costing a lot of money. But I think it's more nuanced than simply underfunding.
Yeah, I think if I come back to the general point about the first order of business is to have premiums that are going to cover the cost of the health care for those members and the expenses, and that we need funded premiums. It's the same for Medicare Advantage. We do have to turn that around. But
Sure.
The main focus here is the QHP market.
Thanks.
Miss AC, do you have anything you want to follow up with around this? I know it took a detour here, but
No, I think we're good. Thanks.
okay. Then I think I don't think we were on the record when we had this conversation, so I'll say it on the record. Blue Cross had suggested that we swear in Miss Brisson Lemieux in the event that when we get into executive session, that there are questions that would be best suited for her to answer. So I'll do that now, and then we'll kind of go through the mechanics of going into an executive session. So, Ms. Lemieux, are you with us?
I am.
Okay. Do you solemnly swear that the evidence you shall give relative to the cause now under consideration shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. So just to remind everybody, the open meeting law has an exemption, or a couple actually exemptions that could apply to the topics that I think are intending to be covered here. But there's also our rate review statute, which is pretty broad. So it says, notwithstanding the open meeting law, the board may examine and discuss confidential information outside a public hearing or meeting. So that would be really any of the blue highlighted information in the binder and the confidential topics to which they relate. So that would be, I think we've identified a prospective solvency assessments, some detailed provider contracting information, and I think some of the DFR has its own unique confidentiality provisions around some of their assessments. So that would be what I would expect to be covered in an executive session here. And so would anybody like to make a motion to go into executive session to consider confidential information under our rate review statute?
I'll move we go into executive session to consider confidential information under the rate review statute.
Is there a second? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Okay. So just to remind you that if you have any questions about, so really this needs to be limited to information that is confidential. If there's any questions about what is confidential that arise, we can talk through that and kind of move to the public session, anything that needs to be done there. In terms of who should go over to the executive session, I think pretty much anyone that got the invite. So the parties and their representatives, the board members, board staff, Department of Financial Regulation folks, court reporter, Blue Cross and its representatives, and I think I got everybody, but is everyone clear on who should be moving over? Okay, I don't hear any questions, so then why don't we leave this call into the executive session, and I'll do a roll call there just to make sure we're all should be there. Okay. Hey, Suzanne, if you just let me know when you're all set up and ready to start.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay,
Yes.
I apologize. Okay. Yes, I'm ready. Apparently, like I have a microphone that like can turn on by itself, but my mic was muted on the actual app, so I apologize.
No
But
worries.
yes, I'm ready to go.
Okay. Excuse me. Then let's go back on record.
Okay,
Mhm.
we are now going back on the record. The time is 3:43 p.m.
And we just finished an executive session, and now turn it to Blue Cross to call their next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. I apologize. We just need a minute. Martine Brisson-Lemieux is just moving from one office, and basically she's switching seats with Dr. Weigel. So she's just on her way. It's how we have to configure due to the team's setup. So we just need a moment.
Okay, yeah, just let me know.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, we're ready. May I proceed?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Lemieux, would you please state your name and your current position for the record?
My name is Martine Brisson-Lemieux, and I'm the Chief Actuary at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont.
And how long have you been at Blue Cross?
I joined the Blue Cross actuarial team in 2009.
Did you prepare and submit pre-filed testimony for this proceeding?
I did.
Would you identify your pre-filed testimony by exhibit number?
Yes, my July 12th pre-filed testimony is Exhibit 18, and my July 16 supplemental pre-filed testimony is Exhibit 21.
Was all of the testimony contained in Exhibit 18 and Exhibit 21 true and correct to the best of your knowledge at the time you submitted it?
Yes.
And is that still true today?
Yes.
Thank you. Were you responsible for preparing the Blue Cross 2025 individual and small group rate filings that are the subject of this proceeding?
Yes.
What was that? Okay, you can proceed.
Yes, I was actively involved in the preparations of the filings, and I am fully familiar with all aspects of the filings and the underlying rate development.
And did you certify the filing?
I did. And at the time of filing, I certified that they meet all relevant actuarial standards of practice, that they comply with applicable state and federal law and regulations. And with the revision included in my supplemental pre-filed testimonies, that certification holds true today.
And were you responsible for preparing the information and responses that Blue Cross has submitted to the questions Blue Cross has received from the board, from Lewis and Ellis, and from the healthcare advocate?
Yes, all the information was either prepared under my supervision or by other Blue Cross departments. I am fully I am familiar with all the aspects in the material and can answer questions related to the methodologies and assumptions in the filing.
Thank you. please turn to Exhibit 12, which is the July 12th responses to questions from the board, from Lewis and Ellis and the HCA, and turn to page 11. Tell me when you're there.
I am there.
Do you see the heading Response to May 28 L&E question and June 20 HCA question?
Yes.
Would you please summarize what's being asked?
The
No.
questions were asking about our projected RBC for 2024 and 2025.
And are you familiar with the response that follows?
Yes.
And are you aware that certain information in that response has been deemed confidential by the board?
Yes.
Without disclosing any confidential information, would you please describe the modeling process in general terms that led to the RBC projection?
So we have two ways that we can project future financial results. First, we can do it deterministically or stochastically. In a deterministic model, we determine specific values for the assumptions like membership, medical trend, investment returns. And then we put all of those pieces together and we calculate, say, risk-based capital at a certain date. In the stochastic modeling, we still define the most likely result for each assumption, but then we put a range of possible outcomes with a distribution around the material assumptions. And then we run the model 10,000 times, which is an enormous amount of time, so that the model can randomly select for each assumption within the range following the distribution, the different assumptions. And that way we have an output that is a range of results and a probability distribution within that range.
And which type of modeling did you use in generating the RBC projections that you've provided during this year's rate review process?
So we did both. So we started with a deterministic model to set our best estimates, and then we moved on and created the stochastic modeling that created the ranges around each of the material assumptions. And we believe that looking at the stochastic results is a more useful information in this proceeding.
Why do you think that? Why do you think stochastic is more useful?
The stochastic model, first, it gives us a range of outcomes. We know that there's a lot that goes into RBC and all the different components can vary. It also gives us probabilities of being above or below a certain range or a certain threshold. And also it takes into account all the variables.
Is this the first time you've used stochastic modeling for this purpose?
No, this is the third year we've created this kind of model for rate review.
Okay. Changing gears a bit, have you had a chance to review Lewis and Ellis's analyses of the filings, which are exhibits 14 and 15 in the binder?
Yes.
Would you please turn to page 23 of exhibit 14 and tell me when you're there?
I'm there.
Is it correct that Lewis and Ellis recommended 6 changes to the proposed individual rates?
Yes.
And if you would flip to page 22 of exhibit 15.
I am there.
L&E recommended 5 changes to the proposed small group rates, right?
Yes.
And those 5 are also made in exhibit 14 with respect to the individual rates, right?
Yes.
What is the 6th recommendation that's specific to the individual rates?
To modify our application of the silver load methodology, and silver loading only exists in the individual market.
And does Blue Cross agree that L&E's recommendations should be adopted in both markets?
Yes.
If you could turn to exhibit 21, your supplemental pre-filed testimony.
Yes.
At pages 1 and 2, does your supplemental pre-filed testimony still accurately reflect Blue Cross's position with respect to L&E's recommendations in both filings?
Yes, it does.
Beyond Lewis and Ellis's recommendations, is Blue Cross proposing any other changes to the originally filed rates?
Yes, we are proposing 2 changes. First, some of our, the New Hampshire hospital with who we contract directly have July 1st renewal dates. So we now have actual negotiated rates for July 1st, 2024. So incorporating those final contract terms and assuming that the next renewal will look like the 2024 renewal, that decreases the proposed rates by 0.2%. The second one is that we are now requesting a 7% contribution to reserve, which is an increase of 4% from the original filing.
If you would turn now to page 5 of Exhibit 21, your supplemental pre-file.
Yep.
Please explain what that table shows.
So the table shows the incremental impacts of LNE's recommendation, except for the update in benefits and the change in silver load methodology, because those don't have an impact on the average rate. It also shows the 2 changes I just talked about.
If you would focus for a moment on the 5th row of the table that shows the impact of updating medical cost trends for Vermont hospitals, that was one of LNE's recommendations, right?
Right. And
oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So this reflects the hospital budget submitted as known on July 16th.
So so just looking at the numbers on the table, if the unit cost trend were set to the hospital submissions, rates would increase by about 1% in the individual market and about 0.9% in small group.
That's correct. That's the value of the change between what we assumed in the original filing for cost trends for FY25 and what is in the submitted hospital budget.
And is it Blue Cross's position that those numbers should be used for the final approved rates?
No. Our position is that we will apply whatever percentage reduction that the Green Mountain Care Board directs us to use for the hospital budgets for FY 2025. Just as a reference point, a 10% reduction in the commercial rate increase, so a 10% becomes a 9%, would reduce our rates by about 0.2%.
And why didn't you make a specific assumption about the Green Mountain Care Board's percentage reduction of the current hospital budget?
Because over the past 2 years, the board has reduced hospital budgets by 17% 2 years ago and 50% last year. And given the variance in those results, we decided not to select an assumed reduction for this table.
So do the final proposed rate increases shown at the bottom of the table on page 5 of Exhibit 21 represent Blue Cross's final proposed rate changes?
Almost, but not quite. Again, the final rate should include whatever the board tells us to reduce the hospital budgets by. And
have you acquired any information since submitting your supplemental pre-filed testimony that bears on this topic?
Yes. I now know that there has been amended hospital budget requests.
And when did you find that out?
Earlier today.
During this hearing?
Yes.
Have you had a chance to process that information and assess its impact on the proposed rates?
No.
And will you do that?
Yes.
Okay. If you would turn to page 3 of Exhibit 1, the actuarial memorandum.
I am there.
Section 1.3 on page 3 lays out the laws, rules, regulations, and other legal authorities that the filings must comply with, right?
Yes.
And in your professional opinion, do the filings comply with those requirements?
Yes.
And if you would flip to page 8 of Exhibit 1, Section 1.8 that begins on page 8 addresses the Vermont statutory criteria that guides the board's review, right?
Yes.
In your professional opinion, do the filings comply with those criteria?
Yes, they do.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Eric, you ready?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Barber. Hi, Ms. Lemieux. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Hanging in there. So would you turn to Exhibit 12, page 14? I just have a few questions, and I promise I will avoid the confidential parts. Just because I can't resist asking fellow numbers questions. I was going to say nerds, but I changed that, Ms. Lemieux. So you list the things that are stochastically modeled, the various lines of business in that claims portion, so the top portion, correct?
Yes.
And then you kind of list out what the assumptions are for 24 and 25, right?
Yes.
And I'm just guessing, and I don't think this really doesn't, but like some assumptions that get you in the that feed into the stochastic model differ, and some are the same. Yep.
Yes.
Okay. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Ms. Beliveau, any questions for Ms. Lemieux?
No, no questions. Thank you.
Board Member Walsh.
Thank you and good afternoon, Ms. Lemieux. My question is in regards to the table in Exhibit 1 on page 23 of the filing.
Yes.
I asked it earlier this morning and your name came up as someone who might be able to answer. I'm trying to understand the ramifications of this table or the implications, where 54% of claims in 23 were made by GMCB regulated entities, 46% not, and the 46% seem to be growing faster. Those, and is that due only to cost meaning price from those entities? Or does that also include utilization and diagnostic intensity?
So this particular table is cost trend only. And I want to point out, because I've been thinking about it today, that the cost trend for Green Mountain Care Board Hospital, regulated hospital, from 24 to 25, that it says 3.5%, right? That is what we included in filing, which for the Vermont hospital, we had assumed that they would follow the Green Mountain Care Board guidance. And just as a data point for you, when that number with the updated hospital budgets that I knew on July 16th, that number becomes 5.7. So just a data point.
Yep.
For your questions around utilization and intensity, right? We do that separately in the filing. We don't split out in our projection of trend if it's a Vermont hospital or a non-Vermont hospital. We do it in total. What we have seen sort of come out of 2024, right, is that we are seeing both increases in utilization and increases in intensity, or which intensity is also known as like the mix of services, right, within a broad category.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think there's been some lack of clarity. Member Merman and I've been asking questions about diagnostic intensity with Medicare CMI, the case mix index. And if in last year's hospital budget hearings, we were presented with information that some hospitals would be trying to increase their case mix index to, in their opinion, more accurately reflect the illness severity of their population. And so I'm trying to better understand what's driving the April and May surge and what's driving the increase in claims overall. And my understanding is that would be a mix of the utilization of services, the price of each service, and the diagnostic intensity associated with each service. Am I thinking about that correctly?
Yes, and I would add to that, and I'm now understanding when you mean the diagnostic intensity, you are referring to how it is coded, right? Versus what we see also as intensity is different services. And I'm not a clinical person, but, you know, increases in more intensive office visits, for example, right? So that's intensity as well. What's difficult with what's going on in March and April and May is that with claims run out, right? So here we sit in July, right? Claims that are paid through July, but really they are for services that are a few months old at this point. And it's difficult to go into that level of detail with no run out, because facility claims, for example, take at least 2 months to be like 90% there. So I don't have good answers for you yet, but it is something we are focused on. We have like working groups that are trying to figure it out. I do have a couple data points to share that I think might answer part of your question. On the inpatient side, what I'm seeing is that admissions are up 2%. So year ended April 24 to year ended April 23. Admissions are up 2%, but our average length of stay is up 17%. Now, I don't know why, but that is a driver, right? The more days you are in, that will be a driver of increased costs. I can also see that on the outpatient side, right? We talked about how outpatient seems very expensive compared to other things. We have a number of visits, which is up 4.5%, but the number of services, and you can have more than one service per visit, that is up 8%. So what we're seeing is that in a visit, there appears to be more services done, right? And so that comes through sort of in the intensity. I don't have the why, but I have these sort of data points and with that, we can sort of send our teams to dig into finding out the why, but it takes some time.
Yeah. It does, I understand, and I appreciate that. As I'm sure you're aware, there have been concerns about increasing diagnostic intensity without corresponding increases in actual morbidity. And so trying to tease that out would be helpful, because I'm concerned. I do not want to try to cap or limit necessary utilization or disincentivize appropriate coding for more severe illness. But I'm receiving messages of more severity and a need for more services at the same time, after for years hearing how healthy Vermonters are. And yes, we've come through a pandemic, and there's some, I think it's important to just build systems that will allow us to explore these issues so that we address the right drivers.
Yeah,
And so-
and I share your concern. The one thing I will say is that splitting, right, coding efficiencies from actual morbidity changes is very complicated. And so to the extent we can find things, we will share with the board, but there may not be sufficient evidence for us to say absolute one way or the other.
Yeah. I'll keep thinking about that. I think because of a fair proportion of Vermonters with Blue Cross coverage receive care outside of Vermont, the borders may provide an instrument to help examine that issue.
I'm going to make a note. That's a really good point.
And that similarly, the 54% versus 46% from that table, trying to understand if there are similar drivers across the state for regulated entities and non-regulated. If Vermonters are getting sick, the numbers should be going up regardless of whether somebody's regulated or not. If something else is driving the changes, that something else could be something about trying to adjust to being regulated, then we would see differences in the regulated entities versus the non-regulated entities. That would be independent of health status. So so those are the things I'm trying to think through. And I hope that that makes sense. And thank you for listening to the questions.
It made a lot of sense. It gave me a lot of ideas.
Board Member Merman, do you have questions?
Yeah. See here. Not the right page. I'm sorry. Let me just, I think I wrote down the wrong exhibit. Let me just see if I can grab it quick. Apologize. I can't get the, some reason I wrote down the wrong one here, but let me ask you the question in general. What I'm trying to understand is, in the medical loss ratio on the medical side of the calculation, and I can find this here, what components are on the medical side of the ML loss ratio that are not direct claims payments?
Okay, so I believe you're asking about our Exhibit 8, which not Binder Exhibit 8, but in the exhibit. And so in the MLR calculation, right, claims include the plan payment for fee for service, right, capitation. It includes other provider payments that we make, blueprints, for example, and I'm going to get them mixed up, but one of the two healthcare tax goes into claims. I cannot remember.
Here we go. I have Exhibit 2, page 61, I think may be a helpful guide for this.
Right, so in the direct claims, that's right. So the plan payment of fee for service, capitation, we have some of our program payments go into claims, things that we call non-system claims on exhibit in the rate development go into here. So that's all the claims that go into that category.
Okay, so if we just talk through this table here, which is Exhibit 2, page 61, first line is expected direct claims PMPM. That's what you're expecting to pay out to healthcare providers.
Yes.
Is there anything else other than paying for providers or pharmaceuticals that falls under direct claims payments?
I believe that this is also net of rebates that we receive from our PBM, but no, that would be it. With one of the healthcare claims tax that it's either the vital portion or the healthcare claims tax portion.
Yeah, I think that's in column the fifth or sixth column, taxes, fees, PMPM.
One of them gets bucketed as a claim in, so the healthcare claims tax, the 0.8% gets actually bucketed as a claim in the MLR calculation, while the other portion, the vital portion, and I just got confirmation, is in that taxes and fee column. It's
Okay.
the
Okay. So
MLR rules, right, are a little different from kind of our rating process for what to claim, what's the tax, what's the fee.
okay. So to go through this table, we have direct claims, which is all claims minus rebates from pharmaceuticals and a 0.8% tax. Then risk adjustment transfers is money that you get from MVP because you have higher risk patients than MVP.
Yeah.
I believe, right? Then you pay $2 per member per month for quality activities, which I assume this is various quality activities plus the prior authorization stuff would fall under that amount.
I'm not sure exactly what falls under that, but yes. So under the MLR rules, we are allowed to count a portion that in other filing exhibits would go into the administrative costs. You're allowed under the MLR rules to move them to a claims expense. So they don't
Okay.
hurt you meeting the MLR threshold because you're spending it on quality.
So what's the difference? And then MLR claims is the claims paid out, essentially?
It's the sum of the three columns before. So it's under the
Got it.
MLR definition, things that count
Okay.
as a claim.
So when you do the MLR ratio, it's MLR claims divided by premium PMPM. Well,
By the
I guess you gotta
MLR
have
premium. Yes.
Yep, by the MLR premium, because the taxes are taken out of that, and that's where you get to 90%. Okay. I was just trying to figure out, it's discussed of your low administrative costs, and if there's anything baked into the medical side that sort of was something that I felt like I should need to understand, but really it's basically $2.08 PM. Oh, there's one that's $2.09, two of them. That is the quality stuff that Blue Cross does that you're allowed to put in the medical side of MLR. And the rest of it is either taxes or claims.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Tom addressed a bunch of these. Can I just ask one question on the length of stay? You just mentioned something that sort of just sparked a little interest of mine, but you say that when a patient stays in the hospital for a longer period of time with an increased length of stay, that generates a larger claim. Is that correct?
It can, yes.
Okay. Because often we hear
Right.
about long length of stays leading to reduced revenue, leading to cost without additional revenue.
That's possible. It will depend on what the hospital sort of reimbursement or payment, right, is. If it's under the DRG and the additional day does not change the DRG, right, I can see that not increasing the revenue. If it creates an outlier because they are longer and there's more cost, so it could increase cost. It was just an interesting data point that we have members who appear to spend more time inpatient without sort of that's what I can see so far. So again, this is like what we can see so far is happening, through April, and then we will I've shared this information with our clinical teams, and they will go and sort of understand the details. Okay.
There's only one other thing. I think you mentioned in your testimony that the board reduced hospital budgets by 17% 1 year and 50% 1 year. I just want to clarify that the board reduced the requested increases to the commercial rate of the hospital budgets by 17% and 50%, but they didn't reduce the hospital budgets by those amounts. I just want to make sure that didn't get misquoted somewhere in the world. But does that seem accurate to you?
I appreciate that. Yes,
okay.
It is the increases that were reduced.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have right now.
That was my poorly phrased question, so thank you for clarifying.
Board Member Lunge, any questions?
Just a couple. Could you speak to how you came up with the impact of Civica RX?
Yes, so let me find the page to make sure I can say everything I want to say.
It's mentioned in Exhibit 18 in your pre-filed testimony in page 6, if that's the page you're looking for.
Real quick, can you spell Civica, please?
I can go ahead and do that. CIVICA, capital RX, all one word.
Thank you.
Right, and the page I was looking for, just so you know where I'm at, is Exhibit 1, page 17.
Oh, great.
So,
Thank you.
Yeah. So Civica RX has, they released a generic version of Baritone, which is a specialty drug, and that came into the market to our members, at least in September of 2023. And we saw a shift from the brand version to the Civica version, like 100%. Now, there's not a lot of members on that particular drug, but it was very expensive. And so what we did, because we saw the 100% shift to the generic version, in the rating development, we have the September through December was at the lower cost drug. And what we did is that we took the first January through August, it was at the higher cost. And we said, okay, let's reprice that to the lower cost because everybody switched. And that's how we calculated the impact of that one drug.
Great, thank you. My other question was, could you also just speak a little bit about your estimations of the H766 impact from removal of prior auth?
Yes, so for that, we, there's a few components, and I know we talked a little bit about it. So again, I will just turn to the same page to make sure I tell you things that I'm allowed to say in open forum. I believe we answered it in our response to the healthcare advocate question. So Exhibit 13, page 2. So for prior auth, right, we did the two places where we have prior authorizations. We have internal programs, and then we have a vendor that helps us with the radiology prior authorization. And we use the similar methodology, different numbers. I won't quote the numbers, but they are on pages 2 and 3, but redacted. We use the same methodology for both, where looking at our historical data, so 2023, we have information around the savings associated with prior authorizations, right? And from there, we looked at the percentage that were for services requested by primary care providers, right? And we assumed that those sort of would go away, right? Because primary care providers under H766 won't need to submit prior authorization.
Okay, and did you look at in that estimation the percentage of prior auth denials versus how many were approved right away?
So my understanding of the data I received, right, so my team did not produce the data, is that the savings that was provided to me was sort of the end result. So I'm assuming that it was for the prior auths that were denied, because if it was denials and appeals, then it would then show up as approved.
Okay, all right, thank you. Let me just check a couple more places, but I think my other questions might have already been asked. One was. Okay, I'm good, thank you.
Member Holmes?
Thank you. I just have a couple quick questions probably. One is a follow-up to Dr. Merman's question about the inpatient length of stay increases that you're observing. And I know you mentioned that you're going to kick some of this back to your clinical team to review. And one of the things I think that would be interesting for us to understand, if it's possible, is what proportion of this is driven by increased, acuity of our patients or our, Vermonters, or no place to discharge patients. Because we're hearing a lot from hospitals about having no place to discharge patients to either skilled nursing facilities or mental health beds or other types of, care. So if that's possible to figure out, that might be helpful as we're trying to think about transformation and some of that work. My second question is just in terms of Exhibit 5. This was the list of some of the programs that Blue Cross Blue Shield has incorporated to increase access, quality, and affordability. And I'm wondering if there's many programs here. Many of them seem, potentially really helpful in this regard. And I'm wondering if you've done, if you have an estimate of the expected net savings to your members associated with each of the programs. So some of them are value-based payment programs, some of them are payment integrity, some of them are utilization management. Really trying to understand, is the benefit in terms of cost savings worth the cost of the programs? And how have you factored in the net savings into the premium rates this year?
So for the programs that have been in place for many years, right, the savings or the results of those programs is embedded in our experience period, right? And so in our trend development, we try to normalize for that because we've seen a growth of that program, of those programs. So that is really embedded in the experience. And, one of, I think, a good example here is when we originally, right, the original H766 had limitation on some payment integrity programs, and we could say, here are the historical savings from that, and that eventually would go away with this, right? So that's how we can measure that. For the value-based payment programs, they're still very new, and we work with our independent primary care practices with those, and some of the early results are really good, but we're talking about small populations, right? So then applying it to a whole book of business for a relatively new program, there's kind of nothing to put in there, but it's still an investment that we want to make in our independent primary care practices.
So does Blue Cross Blue Shield do an analysis over some period of time and decide that they're going to sunset some programs and introduce new ones based on their impact on costs?
Yes, we do look at the programs, and whether it's the sort of the big programs you see on the page, or even sort of the components of each program. So in our internal utilization management programs, for example, Tom's team reviews the data often, looks at the medical policies and the prior authorizations around, different areas, and, will remove some of the prior authorizations on areas, let's say, that, have a really high rate of approval and we're not seeing the value of this administrative work, let's put it somewhere else. So there is ongoing monitoring of our program.
One thing I'll just say for future reference, and this is, I guess, to the whole Blue Cross Blue Shield team, but it'd be really helpful for us to understand the impact of some of these programs as you're doing the analysis. We're always, we ask hospitals all the time about their cost containment programs and their impact. Similarly here, this is a helpful set of program information, but it doesn't come with the, relevant impact. So that would be helpful in the future to understand. But thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Were you done, Jess?
Yes, thanks.
Chair Foster?
The average length of stay increase is that something uniformly across different hospitals, or is it more isolated?
The data I have in front of me is across the whole insured book, but we can dig into sort of where it's coming from. But I don't have that right here.
Okay, that would be great if you could do that. There's, any sort of granularity of where these abnormalities are happening. And my only other
Owen, we're having trouble hearing you.
trouble here.
That's better.
I'll do this. My computer kicked me off. I just said any granularity you have on that you're able to share would be helpful. My only other question was the board order from last year around in connection with your negotiations, taking into account affordability, access, and quality of the providers in negotiating the rates. Can you explain what Blue Cross did in connection with that and how it complied?
Yeah, so as I think it was mentioned earlier today, with the hospital, it is very difficult to get any sort of movement on the rate order that they receive from the Green Mountain Care Board. And so as we look at quality, right, and how do we reward providers for providing better quality, it is very difficult through the commercial rates that, the fee-for-service rate. And it was one of the things we really considered when we put together our enhanced primary care program, the ECPC program, right? Where every metric in that program, it's, there's quality, specific like HEDIS quality measures, there's a wellness visit threshold, and things like that. And so for these practices that are meeting these quality thresholds, we are paying them an incentive. So that is how we can impact the independent practices that have better quality, is by giving, when we set up the ECPC program. But it has been very difficult to do something similar on the hospital side.
Is there any consideration of access, quality, or affordability in connection with the hospital negotiations with Blue Cross?
I believe so. I am not the one who negotiates with the hospital. But yes, it is very important to us as an organization. We know it's important to our members. And it's a difficult balance with, making sure that we also provide an adequate network.
What quality is considered in connection with negotiating with hospitals?
I don't know the answer to that question, so we can follow up on that.
Okay. And then I don't have the page in front of me, but there was a chart that showed the, this is probably not the exact phrase you used, but the community providers received larger rate increases than the GMCB regulated entities. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, again, so I believe that's the cost trend table in the memo, right? And so that was at the time of filing where we assumed that Vermont Hospital would follow the Green Mountain Care Board guidance, right? Every year we look very closely at our community fee schedule, right? And I believe last year we made improvements to the rates, although I do not know specifically if it was across the board for all rates or, sort of targeted to rates that really needed
Okay.
it.
Nothing else. Thank you. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Mr. Onofrio, any redirect?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lemieux. And I think we're doing okay on time. So turn to Kevin Rugeberg from Lewis and Ellis next. Then we need to hear from Mr. Fisher and take public comment. So we might, I'm guessing we're not going to get through that in half an hour. So probably will need to go past 5 a little bit. Does anyone have any conflicts, any problems with that?
I can't go much past 5 because the Copley community meeting this evening.
Would you be able to read the
I could call
transcript
in.
or watch the video?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mike, it'd be, on my end, it'd be good if we push for 5:15 or so, just a little bit over 5 if possible.
We'll shoot for that. Kevin, are you with us?
I am.
Laura, are you prepared?
Yes, although we're much later in the day than we're used to, so might be a little cranky.
Let me just swear Kevin in real quick.
Yes, thank you.
Kevin, do you solemnly? Sorry, I'm getting a little echo. Laura, could you mute yourself? Do you solemnly swear that the evidence you shall give relative to the cause now under consideration shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Okay, go ahead, Laura.
Okay, is this echoing for people? That's all right, great. Good afternoon, Kevin. Could you state your name for the record?
Kevin Ruckeberg,
And where do you work?
Lewis and Ellis.
And there?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that question.
Ma'am, your audio is going out pretty badly. You're breaking up.
Okay, I will switch devices. I'm sorry.
We can hear you
you
magically
back?
all of a sudden now. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll still switch devices. It'll be better for everyone. Let's see. I'll be back in one
The
second.
question
Sorry.
might have been, how long have I been with Lewis and Ellis? I'll answer that while she's changing devices. I believe I'm about to have my 11th anniversary with Lewis and Ellis.
Okay, is this better?
Much. Thank you.
Excellent. So actually was asking what your position at Lewis and Ellis is.
I'm a senior consulting actuary.
And can you please turn to Exhibit 22 of the binder?
I'm there.
Great. And can you do you recognize it? And can you briefly describe the information contained in it?
Yes, this is my pre-filed testimony. It contains information about my educational and work background, information on how we review filings for the board, and a summary of our recommendations regarding these filings.
Is the information in this document accurate and correct to the best of your knowledge?
With one exception, as Blue Cross has noted, there was a calculation error in our report. We had said that if our recommendations were followed, that the increases would be 14.5% in the individual market and 17.4% in the small group market. However, there was a mistake in the calculations there, and the correct values are actually 15.2 and 18.0. As noted in Ms. Lemieux's pre-filed testimony.
Great. And with that being noted, do you wish to adopt this pre-filed testimony as part of your testimony today?
Yes, I do.
Can you briefly describe your role in L&E's review of Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Vermont's individual and small group filings?
Yes, I am part of a team of several people at Lewis and Ellis who review these filings. I am personally responsible particularly for the Blue Cross filings, whereas my colleague Jacqueline Lee is responsible for the MVP. But we communicate constantly throughout that review process. And we also have several other people on our team who assist in our review of these filings. So upon receiving the filings, I review all of the materials therein, as well as a couple other members of our team. We produce questions to provide additional information that we need to reach a determination. We discuss internally to make sure that our review of both carriers is consistent. And then we issue a report summarizing our findings and recommendations for the board.
Can you describe how you submit those recommendations?
Yes, we submit those recommendations in the form of a report that's due 60 days after the filing is submitted. I forget the exact date that was submitted. Early this month, I believe.
And there are 2 reports, is that right?
Correct. One for the individual market and one for the small group market.
Great. The report for the 2025 individual market is Exhibit 14, and the report for the small group market is Exhibit 15. Could you please turn to those?
Yes.
And did you, I know we discussed in your pre-file testimony the changes you wanted to make. Are those incorporate also into your report? Is that right? So using the corrected figures, the recommended increase is now 15.2% for the individual market and 18% for small group. Is that right?
Correct. I'll add the caveat that we also recommended the board consider updated hospital budget information that wasn't available, but yes.
Great. Can you explain your standard of review in both filings?
Yes, we review these filings to ensure that the proposed rates are actuarially sound, they are adequate, and that they are not unfairly discriminatory. And also that they're not excessive, I think is part of that list.
Yeah. And do you review for affordability?
No.
Using your methodology and standard of review, did you make any recommendations to modify this proposed filing?
Yes, we made, I believe it's 6 recommendations regarding the individual filing and 5 regarding the small group. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. If all of your recommendations were to be implemented, can you explain what the ultimate projected rate increase would be?
A few of our recommendations were not quantified, but if I leave off the discussion of CSR, I believe the answer to that question is 16.0% for the individual market and 18.8% for the small group market. I'm trying to quickly do that mental math and make sure that's accurate, but I believe that's correct. And then I believe in the body of our report, we said the board should consider the input of DFR on the CTR assumption. So I don't want to imply that that's inconsistent with the 21.0 and the 24.0. It's been discussed previously today.
Of course. And have you reviewed the other pre-file testimony in this proceeding? And have you listened to the testimony today so far? Great. I'm sensitive to the time, and I could go through asking about each of your recommendations, but they are in your report and pre-filed testimony. So if the board, if it pleases the board, we could not go through those item by item. If that's acceptable, great. So if your recommendations as of today are implemented, do you believe that rates would be excessive?
Kevin, I can't.
Your audio broke up for me. Could you say that again?
No,
Thanks.
I'm sorry, I can say that again. I said no. Yeah.
Do you believe the rates would be inadequate?
No.
Thank you. I don't know if it's me or your audio. And do you believe they would be unfairly discriminatory?
No, I do not.
All right. I have no further questions at this time.
Okay, questions from Blue Cross for Kevin?
No, thank you.
Eric, any questions from the HCA?
We just have a few quick questions. So, hi, Mr. Rogerberg. I'm going to ask you just a few questions about Lewis and Ellis's actuarial recommendations that you filed in these cases. Could you turn to Exhibit 14, page 22? That's Lewis and Ellis's actuarial recommendations for the individual filing. Let me know when you're there. You're there? Okay. So take a look at the histogram up near kind of the top of the page about the histogram showing the distribution of CTR. So the originally filed contribution to reserves of 3% places Blue Cross roughly or essentially in the middle of that hump, correct?
Correct.
And that's the bin that's highlighted, right? The 3%.
Kevin, we're having trouble
Sorry.
hearing you.
Now I'm
Yes.
having trouble hearing you too.
I'm sorry. Yes, the bin that is a different color is reflective of the initially filed 3%. Yes.
And so, as you mentioned in the report, in the memorandum, Blue Cross has changed that CTR request to 7%. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then you say in a few first, second, third, I guess the third paragraph that 7 is abnormally high. So looking at that histogram above, that would put it in the second to highest bin on the right, right?
I think it would probably technically be the highest bin just because, at least in the individual market, there's also a slight amount for bad debt. So I think it's technically about 7.1. So yeah, I think it's actually the highest bin.
Okay. And so I'm just trying to understand how to read this histogram, and I want to make sure I have it right. So let's just assume, we know it's actually higher, but let's say it was in the second to highest bin. When it says 6.5%, that means 6.5% of the carriers that you looked at filed CTR that's in that bin, that amount?
Those ranges are, so all of the text that you're seeing there is describing the upper and lower bounds of that bin.
Of the bin.
So what it's saying is that bin, which I imagine is one carrier, is everyone from 6.5, I take it 6.5000001 up to 7.0. There's one carrier falling in that range. So the number of carriers is being communicated by the vertical axis. So for example, the bin in which Blue Cross Vermont falls is 50 or 51, 52, something in that space. That many carriers have a CTR in that range.
And so maybe you can't do this math with the information you have, but so you had mentioned the 3%. places Blue Cross in the, the 59th percentile for QHP carriers for CTR. What percentile would it be in with the 7% CTR request?
Could get back to you with a precise number. I can confidently say it looks like 3 or 4 carriers were that high in 2023 out of approximately 300. So that would be about the 99th percentile.
99th percentile.
Approximately, so somewhere between 97th and 99.5, something like that.
So just to be clear for everyone who's listening, what that means, let's say it's, we'll put it at the 98th percentile just to be safe. That means it's higher than 90% of the carriers that you looked at in terms of CTR requests.
Correct. Granting the 98%, as you said, higher than 98% rather than 90,
okay.
But yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Ruggerberg. That's all my questions.
Do any board members have questions for Kevin?
I do.
Why don't you go ahead, Tom?
Thank you. Could we turn to Exhibit 14, page 3? The table at the bottom of that page. Would you please describe what constitutes the difference between the gross and net changes in premium as outlined in the table?
Absolutely. Gross premium is a reference to premium pre-subsidy. So that's the premium that is technically being considered by the board in this hearing. That is the amount that Blue Cross will receive per member per month when members enroll in that coverage. When we say net premium, we're referring to the premium that will be paid by the member, either a small group employer, an individual, their family, et cetera. There is in the individual market, significant gap between those two numbers because a substantial portion of the premium, especially for lower income households, is paid for by federal subsidies. So when we say, for example, that the gross premium is let's see it. It's been a second since I read this chart. I want to make sure I'm interpreting it correctly because I see it says, oh, yes. So the net premium for many members is actually 0 to buy bronze or catastrophic coverage. That's because the subsidies provided by the federal government exceed the gross premium for those plans.
Yeah. Thank you. And the sentence right above the table, you use the phrase "a large majority." Can you help me get a better quantitative assessment of what that is?
Yeah, so a very relevant number I would point you to is in the paragraph prior. According to the most recent data we had at the time, 88% of households in Vermont's individual market receive advanced premium tax credits. So for those members, the subsidies are increasing very quickly. And so for all of those 88% of members, I should be careful. I believe it is the case that all of them will be able to purchase gold in 2025 for less than they could in 2024, at least from Blue Cross. I'm not able to quantify, I'm not even sure I can at all, frankly, even